Now it's a pleasure to welcome back to the forum Jitin Bhandari, CTO of Cloud and Network Services with Nokia. Jitin, you sat on a panel earlier in the day. I hope everyone got to see that. If not, you'll be able to revisit on demand. Now I'm excited to get to have a one-on-one with you and go a little bit deeper. I think you gave us a really kind of nice starting point in a recent analyst briefing you conducted on Nokia's vision for the future network architecture. So maybe to get us started, can you just lay out that high-level vision for our audience?
Indeed, Sean, and thank you for having me over here. Look, very recently we unleashed a 2025 and beyond tech strategy for broader Nokia. And what we believe at Nokia is that, network is central to these two bigger themes. One is cloud and the other one is AI. And without an actual, converged true mobile environments that delivers a robust, high resilient, secure with the bandwidths and latency we need for the new age services for industries, enterprises, and consumers, the acceptance and the acceleration of cloud and AI is going to be a challenge. And we have to understand that. So when we laid out that tech strategy, networks and future network architectures were front and center to it. And one of the other things that we at Nokia strongly believe that the service provider friends have a very unique opportunity to tap into an additional about $1.1 trillion markets that are unfolding in front of them with new opportunities in the spaces of many, many verticals. And let me assure when we talk about these network architectures, we are talking about how do we build a future network that actually caters to these new markets. We are talking about building networks beyond service providers. We are talking about building networks for industries and enterprises for specific business use cases that caters to some of these network demands when we are talking about network surveillances or public safety use cases for enterprises for carpeted and non-carpeted industries. And I'm talking about not only just in the private wireless context, which is probably the 1.0 era. I'm talking about in the macro network context and how do we build up agility and scale into it. And it's easier said than done, Sean, because there are many building blocks underneath that leads up to these foundational pieces. We are also realizing that, CSP, because they have a very unique genome of building and operating networks at scale for consumers, they have these capabilities where they can pivot off into this cloud continuum and build up cloud practices, build up security practices, build up AI practices for the broader industries and enterprises if the networks are foundationally built right. So if you see, some of these network architectures, whether it was building architectures that caters to digital twinning systems in industries and enterprises, if it is about network architectures that build up to new cloud and interconnectivity of cloud data centers, and how do you solve the connectivity and networking challenge, both in conversion environments and mobile environments, and eventually the use cases for industries and enterprises. So that's where you see quite a bit of work at Nokia we have done. And needless to say, automation, AI, cloud, security, these are technology paradigms that are front and center to this architecture.
All right, so great overview, and we're thinking about cloud and AI as pillars of this future network architecture that runs across a sort of network cloud continuum spanning device, edge, regional infrastructure, core. So next question would be if you could help us understand and draw a distinction between where more classic forms of artificial intelligence fit into this, where generative artificial intelligence fits into it, and if ultimately the answer is that it's going to fit in everywhere, what it would be sort of an order of operations for operators as they go down this path?
That's actually a very interesting question. Look, we started on the AI journey, and telcos did as well. And as much as we have a very emphatic offerings around AI since 2018, 2019, and I'm talking about the traditional AI as we now know it, because the chapter of generative AI has unfolded and transformer models have folded in front of us. So we're talking about ML and machine learning techniques, taking more structured data, real time, near real time data, and applying it to ML models, right? And that was one aspect where we were talking about prediction, classification, these kind of use cases, traffic predictability, placing workloads on a data center, traffic steering use cases, all that was, and classification of whether the networks are secure or not, or classification of whether the networks are congested or not, or using sustainability use cases. So ML and ML techniques were great. And we have actually unfolded 80 plus use cases around operators, with 300 plus operators around many, many parts of these pieces. And as generative AI comes into play, there is this notion of what we call conversational AI, and this agentic AI mode that's unfolding is really, really exciting. Two things are happening, and obviously, we are now talking unstructured data, large language model data, multimodality in data, voice data, and vision. So everything is blended into it. So that makes the AI offering much more powerful. Networks are going to be conversational in 3 to 5 years. That's what we strongly believe. So whether you are building, operating, managing a network, how do you insert the conversational aspect? That generative AI and transform models are going to be fundamental. Now, you asked a very, very fundamental question, which is how do operators start? Now, this technology can be overwhelming. We, as a telco, have just unfolded on 1.0 era of 5G rollouts, very early stages of cloud adoption, hybrid clouds, private clouds, public clouds, and so on and so forth. And here comes another technology, right? And AI adoption is also in its early infancy, I would say. How do I take care of generative AI or traditional AI? I would step back and make a very broader three-part approach, which we have started to realize, and we have started to work with operators and even internal use cases. Number one is all about use cases, use cases, use cases, and it's about understanding the persona of the human that's associated with the cycle of the network, whether you are in the build cycle, operate cycle, and care and maintenance cycle, or security, or any other parts of the networks, or design operations. Think about the operations and think about the business outcome and define the use case crystal clear. So that's one part of it. And define what, in our case, what we have started to do is quantify the business outcome, the dollar value optimization that you could do using generative AI and traditional AI as a tool. So that's number one and foremost. Once we do that, identifying data constructs and data governance and sources of data. And I'm here talking both structured and unstructured data. Let's talk about unstructured data. A lot of people think about, you can start using these models, throw data at it. But, when you play with unstructured data, and this is one technology where you can do a POC on a trial in 2 weeks. But when you want to build a system for scale, it takes quite a bit, right? And when you talk about scale, you're talking about continuous pipelines of data. How are you doing retrieval augmentation? How are you doing knowledge graphs? How are you doing data federation? How are you doing, and this is all in the context of unstructured data. We are looking some of these problems real time because we're talking about millions and millions of data constructs being played out, right? So data governance, privacy, security, observability from near real time, non-real time standpoint, all these needs to be addressed. So that's point number two after the use case outline. And number three and foremost, and I don't think many people out there in the industry, specifically telcos, are talking about, there's a huge amount of verticalization of generative AI that's happening as we speak. And telco, as we all know, are very cost sensitive industry, right? I mean, capex, opex pressures are already there. Top lines aren't growing that as much as we would like to because of the consumer use cases. We are still exploring into industries and enterprises and the use cases. And then begs a question, how do we deal with the power of open source and open versus closed models as we build a vertical telco AI solution? right? And this is one of the very interesting things. What we are finding at Nokia is that some of these models, ATB Llama models or Mistral models, or even star coders of kinds, we're looking at model farm, model garden strategies with open source capabilities, and they come out to be very, very powerful. But model farms are just foundational to it. There are many, many pieces to this stack that leads up to what we call the large language model operations. And so I would urge service providers to start thinking the number three part of this strategy is how do you build up model farms, model gardens? Where do you corner yourself to an open model, to a closed model, a blend of both, and how do you take the cost aspects of it? So three things: use cases and business value proposition, data governance, privacy, security around, and observability. And number three, model farm, model gardens, open versus closed. These are three strategic pillars that I would really urge operators to start out with.
All right, so I want to play that back a little bit, then go deeper on some of those pillars. So what we're trying to do here is understand our customers' intent and then align the network in service of delivering that intent in a highly automated fashion. So to do that, you need a data strategy. You need to accelerate use cases on top of that data layer. And if you get it right, you can simultaneously touch your OpEx and create new revenue opportunities. So on the use cases that benefit from AI, it seems like what's working in the market is a very narrow focused approach that has a very kind of clear near-term ROI profile against it and then sort of build from there. But just any examples you're seeing from your customers that would at least kind of directionally suggest a sound AI strategy?
Yeah, I mean, look, the obvious piece of it is because, from a telco standpoint, we spend quite an enormous amount of OpEx and some part of CapEx as well in managing operating a network, right? And that's long cycles. Typically, we roll out networks in first 2, 3 years, and the networks sit out for serving for 4 to 7 years, right? And these are long managing operating cycles, and there's a lot of textual data, textual documentation, ticketing, services, care. So that's where there is an exuberance in the telco industry and other industries as well for services and care ticketing and transforming pieces of it. I'll give you a case in point, and this is very, very exciting. I mean, typically, we at Nokia serve into 350 operators worldwide, and 5G SA, which is now going to unfold in 2025 in a bigger way. We only saw about 22% adoption in the markets. We are seeing huge amount of high level, low level design implementations of 5G SA. And when you talk about these design implementations, you're talking about detailing of the networks, how workload placements are done, how interconnectivities are done. These are drilling cycles of 4 to 6 months. And there is parts of learnings, but really no automation, really no parts of building of these frameworks automatically. And what we're doing indigenously out here at Nokia is taking some of these learnings and feeding it into the models. Can the models help us shorten this 4 to 6 month cycles to as much as 4 to 6 weeks? And even if they deliver to 60 to 70 to 75% of what is needed, human augmentation can be done on top of these model outcomes to get to the right outlook on these high level, low level designs and implementation designs. Another piece that we are seeing is, security. Security is playing a very interesting space where capabilities of security personnel, understanding whether it's a green or an amber alert, what does this mean? Whether this is an intrusion on the data privacy or whether this is a management or an access endpoint intrusion detection. Typically you can have predictive dashboards using ML techniques on a secure network, but how do you interpret them? And this is where conversational and generative AI piece comes into play, where you can apply 3GPP and NIST specification on a generative AI model, feed the model some of these predictive models coming out of ML. Here I'm talking about cusp of both ML techniques and generative AI techniques applied together to each other, and the model can give you what does that Amber Alert mean. I'm seeing XYZ intrusion from this management plane access or a control plane access by this credential that you may want to watch out for, right? And we are seeing very effective use cases of it. So they do consume a lot of energy, a lot of OpEx, a lot of operations intensity. It's also directly related to customer experience and the brand value, especially the security use cases, right? The brand value is enormous. The regulatory aspect is enormous. So if we could turn around these cases in minutes and hours rather than dragging along in days, we have seen some of it earlier this year that really impacted, not for telcos, but non-telco environments. These are great impactful use cases that where you can use agentic AI capability into the networks, we believe.
So I do want to talk a little bit more about some of these foundation models that are being used. I think it's fair to say that there's not going to be one model that rules them all. And while there's so much attention paid to these multi-billion parameter models, when we think about delivering specific outcomes in specific domains, there's a really strong case for a smaller model, for a curated model. What do you think about the idea? Does telco need its own large language model or multimodal model, or would we be better served to take what's out there and pare it down to some very specific use case? What's the right way to think about that?
Well, yeah, the answer is later. No, we don't need to create a model from scratch when it comes to telcos, and telco is no exceptions. That's how the trends are in other verticals and industries are going to be. That what we call the term foundational models. People always start up with foundational models. Now, the challenge with foundational models, Sean, is that these models are trained on large internet corpus data, right? And we have enormous amount of knowledge base. It just, a lot of people talk about what does Nokia has to do with data and data construct. We see enormous amount of data from a one-to-many relationship because we are serving 350 plus service providers, and large part of that data is sitting on our side of the fence. We are not operating and managing a network, but there are data that's sitting on our side with our products, with our solutions, with our services, with our ticketing care, with our knowledge base of building and creating networks and operating networks. That's all our data, and that's enormous data that's not widely available on the internet. So now, if you think about it, when I talk about verticalization of these foundational models, it's a two-part answer to your question. Number one, we need to start up on a foundational model. You're spot on that what we have to start thinking about is a model farm or a model garden kind of a strategy. No one model can suffice to all these 80 to 100 plus use cases that we are unfolding based on the persona of the network operator. You could be a security, you could be an ops guy, you could be a network planning guy, you could be an engineering guy. And based on the persona, you take the use case, and then you have these farm or a garden with half a dozen models that are serving to it, and each model performs differently. So we are doing telco specific benchmarking capabilities around it. We are applying and augmenting all the knowledge base based on various tools and techniques. Retrieval augmentation is often talk about it. Low rank adaptation and fine tuning of models in some cases is being looked at. How do you do data vectorization in an unstructured data? These are sciences and techniques which need to be built and developed telco specific. And so it's less about the foundational model, more about the operations techniques around it. And this is what we have realized firsthand working with both operators and also more importantly with use cases we are building internally for our large R&D services operations team. So the answer lies there. It's a little complicated process because one needs to understand few things. Number one, obviously, the understanding or the deep understanding of transformer practices. I just enumerated a few, from fine-tuning models to retrieval augmentation to data vectorization to knowledge graphs and fine-tuning of these things and so on and so forth. Second is you need to have an in-depth knowledge of how do you deal with open source and software stack. per se, right? And so aggregating those vertical software stacks is an art and a science, and who knows better than us, because we have been in open source communities since 2016, building all cloud native networks using open source capabilities that are now powering up telco networks from a telco on tech standpoint, right? So that's an art and a science as well. And then the third piece we talked earlier about is the data construct, and data construct in telcos, because unlike IT system, everything is non-real time, right? And so you can take contextual data from documentation, which is non-real time, large language corpuses, multimodality pieces. But when you augment both real time, near real time, and non-real time, which is what the telco context comes into play, that becomes very, very unique for this vertical, right? And so we are looking at from that perspective, using Bell Labs techniques as well in some of these scenarios of what we have done on the learnings on ML side. So the answer is model farms. Answer is building telco practices around it. Answer is taking more enormous, mature data corpuses and building the practices and building up to a horizontal platform. And then on top, define the use cases and persona and go expand.
Excellent, Jitin. Well, we're at time, and I think that's a great place to leave it. But I really appreciate you joining the forum today and sharing your perspective with our audience. It's great to catch up with you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you really for this opportunity, and enjoy the conversation.